If there's one thing that screams irony, it's a member of the U.S. Armed Forces trafficking drugs, right? They are, after all, on opposite sides of the law. While the armed forces stand for justice and discipline, things we admire about the United States, drug peddlers are seen as a scourge on society. However, to U.S. Marine Roberto Salazar Jr., not even the honor of serving the U.S. could stop his criminal empire. In a way, his plan was ingenious. Most people really won't suspect a Marine of working against the interests of the state, so Roberto Salazar went and did exactly that. One of the many questions that people immediately think to ask, and rightly so, is, how did this all come to be? In this video, we're going to take you through one of the most bizarre tales in the recent history of how a Marine managed to successfully smuggle drugs into the United States for years. The cone doesn't fall far from the stump. You see, Roberto had been in the smuggling game long before he became a Marine. As a child, he traveled between Mexico and the United States a lot. In fact, he regularly traveled to Tijuana with his father, Roberto Salazar I. It was Roberto Sr. who introduced his son to the world of crime. Roberto Sr. was not exactly what you'd call an ideal father, and he was reported as being abusive and absent. When Roberto Jr. was about 10 years old, his father, who originally was from Mexico, got deported from the U.S. In 2013, at the age of just 16 years old, Roberto decided to finally dive into the world of crime himself. He started smuggling illegal immigrants into America. It was a risky business, and soon he moved to drugs. You see, the thing is that there is a lot to consider when smuggling people. For one, people take up a lot more space. There are a lot more things to consider, like providing food and water, the fact that they can easily be fished out by sniffing dogs, and you can only carry very few of them at a time, amongst other reasons. It was more risky to run, and it didn't make as much money, so it just made better sense for Roberto to traffic drugs instead, and so he started smuggling mostly heroin into the United States. The fast lane life. At the age of 18, Roberto applied to and got admission at Southwestern College, located in Chula Vista, California. A college education did not slow down his drug smuggling business, though. If anything, it just made things better. He managed to recruit one of his college classmates into helping him move drugs. Soon, business was booming, and then he had to employ another and another. Roberto loved a particular method of smuggling in which vehicles stashed with drugs were driven across the U.S. border through legal ports of entry. You see, law enforcement did not expect such a brazen endeavor. Smugglers are often known to prefer moving into America through illegal means and rarely ever actually repeatedly go through official ports for obvious reasons. It's much easier to get caught when you go through Border Patrol. Border Patrol checks vehicles very meticulously, and more often than not, driving a car loaded with drugs right to Border Patrol was as good as putting the handcuffs on the wrist yourselves. However, Roberto had a trick up his sleeve. There were BMW vehicles which, due to a design decision from the company, had a unique engine compartment that was perfect for stashing drugs. At the time, Border Control mostly overlooked checking this particular compartment, and so for a long time, it was used as the location to keep stashed narcotics. Of course, BMW was not aware that this design choice would be used by smugglers to traffic drugs, but Roberto and his cronies continued to exploit this feature. As a college student, Roberto Salazar kept at healthy distance from his illegitimate business. He would purchase the vehicles that were used to transport the drugs, and then his drivers would drive them to a repair shop in Tijuana. There, they'd be loaded with drugs and simply drive back into the U.S. To most people, it just seemed like someone making a harmless trip to Mexico and back. No one really suspected a thing, and there were no incidents. Actually, there were no incidences until 2016, when his college classmate got busted at the San Isidro border crossing with 5 pounds of cocaine, and more than 20 pounds of methamphetamine. However, Roberto managed to stay out of trouble since he had very carefully kept his involvement with the drug shipment very minimal, and there was very little connection to the bust. He just continued trafficking the drugs. Running the business as a Marine. Roberto, now 21 years old, joined the U.S. Marines. Whatever reason he joined the Marine Corps is a reason best known to him. Perhaps he figured that he'd be less likely to be a suspect in drug smuggling as a Marine. Or perhaps it was a lifelong dream. Whatever it was, we can only speculate. The background checks revealed nothing particularly interesting about Roberto, and so he got in. He was eventually stationed in San Diego at Marine Corps Air Station Miramar, where he worked as a radio operator. As a Marine, Roberto Salazar continued his business as if nothing had happened. He decided to employ the services of former Marines to help transport drugs across the border. This seemed to work well for him. He paid them $2,000 per trip that they made. They both made numerous trips during this time. With the work that his employees were doing, he was able to successfully move a lot of products around, careful to distance himself like he always had. However, it seemed that after years of success, Roberto finally started getting sloppy, as most people in this line of business do. Soon, he became more personally involved in the trafficking, occasionally making trips to and from Mexico himself. He also really started to feel himself as a trafficker, employing the services of a musician to write a ballad about him. These sorts of ballads are not new, and many Mexican drug lords actually have them written for themselves. They're called narco-corridos. Roberto's narco corrido, commissioned by Roberto himself, was allegedly supposed to have lyrics like, "I wanted to study and I became a soldier, but I liked the fast life better." However, while the song was commissioned, it was never really completed. The beginning of the end. Things started to take a turn for the worse for Roberto when in September of 2021, at the San Isidro border crossing, one of his drivers was caught with 14 pounds of fentanyl. This was the same border that his college classmate had been caught back in 2016. This case caught the attention of U.S. law enforcement. From this moment on, he didn't know it yet, but it was the beginning of the end for him and his drug smuggling empire. After that, things started to collapse really fast. In January 2022, one of Roberto's drug runners, who was attempting to make a heroin delivery in Las Vegas, was stopped by the police and was being chased. Desperate, he left a kilogram of heroin on a shelf of a grocery store and fled from the cops. He had gotten away, but the police had gotten solid info in this case that was eventually used in the prosecution of Roberto. Roberto himself had allegedly been involved in this particular drug run, and this had been one of his flaws. Soon after this, one of his couriers was pulled over by a police officer on Interstate 5 in Oceanside and caught with more than 13 pounds of fentanyl in his car. Another courier was stopped at the Otay Mesa port of entry with more than 17 pounds of fentanyl in his car. The humiliating arrest. These busts all pointed towards Roberto. The police soon had a solid case with a mountain of evidence against him. Roberto Salazar was arrested on several drug trafficking charges. There was no way he could fight the evidence against him, and so, in October 2022, Roberto pled guilty to conspiring to distribute controlled substances, including heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl, and to importing fentanyl into the United States from Mexico. In April 2023, Roberto Salazar Jr., after 10 years in the business of smuggling narcotics into the United States, was finally sentenced to 12 years in prison. Chad Platts, special agent in charge of HSI San Diego, said this about the case. While disheartened by an individual who hid in the ranks of our prestigious U.S. military, this should serve as a warning to any would-be narcotic smugglers that you cannot hide your nefarious crimes and you will be held accountable. Today's sentencing is a result of an ongoing HSI investigation in collaboration with our law enforcement partners to disrupt and dismantle transnational criminal organizations and their importation of deadly narcotics into the U.S. Todd Battaglia, special agent in charge of the NCIS Marine Corps West Field Office, also had this to say. Mr. Salazar betrayed his oath to the Marine Corps and posed a significant threat to our national security by participating in an illegal operation to smuggle fentanyl into the United States. NCIS and our partners remain committed to fully investigating all allegations of criminality within the ranks that threaten military readiness and jeopardize the safety of our community members. It is clear that Roberto's incarceration is a big win, both for the U.S. justice system and the reputation of the name of the Marine Corps.